Hi, I'm Sandy Sims with SDS Digital and the Accord Sequarallel. This is the third video tutorial on the TRAX trackers. This one will be covering NoteFX. To save time, I have pre-added a couple of TRAX quick boxes, each with a pair of sequences within. Let's have a listen. Entering the playlist, you can see both TRAX 1 and 2's A sequence is playing. But we're going to work with TRAX 1B to start, so I'll arm it to play. You can jump directly to the editor from the playlist with Edit. This saves going back to the main screen and scrolling up to TRAX 1 quick box. As you can see, it's a simple 16-step one-lane sequence, but TRAX 2's bass notes can still be heard as well. To get rid of that for now, besides actually muting TRAX 2, the solo PL quick box can be used. On first click, it selects this TRAX to play, but does nothing as it's already playing, while the second click solos this TRAX temporarily. Selecting FX Edit reveals that none of the notes have effects. Let's add FX 1 to the first set of 4 notes and FX 2 to the second set. The second group for NoteFX 2 starts at step 9. Triple-clicking a note on the grid will open parameters for that note. The MIDI note number, which is 56, the velocity, which defaults to 100, I'll take that up as it's the first note. The note's delay from the time the step was entered. This is in 24ths of a step, so 12 would delay half a step. The note length is also in 24ths. The first digit is steps and can be held on as long as 8 steps. I'll leave it a bit over half a step. Next is the number of the NoteFX bundle you want to use with this note, 1 to 8, or none. One to 8 must be selected though, for the last selection to work. This takes you to the NoteFX number, which is 1 for this note. Once in the NoteFX menu, any effects can be selected to edit without changing the one assigned to the note we used to get there. TRAX Edit Effects selects the edit. This next entry will copy a note effects from any other TRAX. This will overwrite whatever settings are in this NoteFX bundle, so use with caution. The next entry is the element randomizer, which we'll get back to later on. And the range of the randomization from 1 to 8. The first thing we'll modify is the echo repeat. This feature will cause notes to echo at the time specified. Up to 8 echoes can be triggered by a single note, thus a total of 9 notes. Scrolling the feed up starts to produce the first echo. Feed can go all the way up to 150%, so a quiet note can echo into loudness. Timing is important as each echo adds on by the set time, which is also in 24ths of a step. Setting the echo repeat to 3 means 4 notes from the original note. With the time set to 1, the echoes will fit into 2 steps. Longer times can go for quite a while with a higher rate setting. So one must be careful not to use this effects with too many notes in a short time, or the MIDI synth may top out its polyphonic limit. The The time can be quite short as well, almost mimicking a ratchet or a chop. Speaking of that, the next retriggerer, if that's a word, is the chop setting. You'll notice that it resets the echo repeat setting once entered. This means you can use one or the other, but never both. The chop fits all the notes into one step, so higher settings are more of a burst of notes. This is why there's also a curve setting. Exponential curves from fast to slower on the plus side or slow to faster times on the minus side can be minimal or pronounced. The curve feature also works with echo, but is very gainy and somewhat mysterious. I forgot to show that, so you can experiment with it. The next feature is Microarp. This one is a personal favorite of mine because it can transpose echoes and chops. The first number is the step, 1 to 8, while the second is the transpose value. The first original note will use whatever the step is set to at the time. So I'll leave step 1 at no transpose, then plus 7 for step 2, plus 3 for step 3, and plus 1 octave for step 4. The 3 echoes will play steps 2, 3, and 4 if the step box is left at 1. You may have noticed the transpose offset shown is immediately applied, with the ones after following. This is good for auditioning. Some don't sound like they belong though, and if you're a stickler for not doing live updates, i.e. not playing the sequence, then a scale can be derived by intervals of the notes in the sequence. Myself, I like the unpredictability of it. The Microarp can also be used alone, without chop or echo, by the randomizing setting we'll cover later. The next NoteFX setting is Midi Pan. The minus side is left, while the plus side is right. Let's set NoteFX 1 with left, and NoteFX 2 with right. The echo and chop notes don't have a pan value, but any steps that have notes with either NoteFX 1 or 2 will pan the MIDI channel, so it can sound pretty three-dimensional. Otherwise, pan returns to the center with steps that have no NoteFX, with pan control modified. The instrument setting will do a MIDI program change by notes with this NoteFX number. This means you can use multiple different sounding voices in one track sequence. For it to be useful, we need to create another one in NoteFX 2. If you plan on using this feature, I recommend setting your initial instrument in the MIDI push quick box so you can reset it at any time, unless you always start with this particular NoteFX. Just a friendly tip. Interestingly, TRAX 1 sequence, which we can't hear because I have soloed this TRAX, is using the same MIDI channel and also has a program change operation going on. I'll unsolo so we can hear how they interact. There's some other magic going on here with the random solo ducking in TRAX 1, which we'll have a look at in the second part of this tutorial. So next is the fine tune. This is basically a MIDI pitch bend and will resolve to the pitch bend width setting in MIDI push, which is plus minus 2 semitones by default. The panel CV jack will also bend to ±2, so we'll track the MIDI by this default. The tuning only lasts for the step that has this NoteFX. The glide setting is similar in that MIDI and CV output can track it, but unfortunately the glide rate gains are so varied from synth to synth that probably one should avoid using the two together. CV mode jacks have their own glides, so. On the other hand, it can create some really cool sounds. The Sequarallel CV rate gain is quasi-exponential in trying to match modern synths, but my 1990s Yamaha MU128 is far from this, with very little gain on the start. The glide from note setting is obvious, so no need to explain that. Next is a pair of Midi Cc Modifiers. This, of course, can be anything, and has NRPN and aftertouch support as well, if you scroll left on the first parameter. My favorite pair of CCs is cut and resonant, so let's try that. Resonance is CC71, so it should be high enough to notice. Cut is CC74, and I'll set that one low. Like the instrument setting, it's probably good to have an opposing NoteFX number with another value for these, but it's not a requirement. There's no need to add CC71 again, as it won't be changed by the second half of the sequence. Also in the MIDI push quick box, you should enter these CCs and default values for this channel so they can be reset with the click of a button if needed. It's up to you though. These CCs are not included in the MIDI push vitals option though. Randomize can also control these CCs, and that will be covered shortly. Okay, let's put them back for the rest of this section. Exiting will reset the editing PL solo button, so you don't have to turn it off. For the last NoteFX parameters, we'll use a different sequence, as a VCO will be needed. By the way, arming while playing won't change the play start arm blocks, so once stopped, the original blocks will rearm. This is so the song project starts the same way each time. The next parameter is note probability. Setting this down will cause random skipping of notes and their NoteFX modifiers. You can clearly hear notes skipping because this is a single lane sequence, but with chords it's a different story. I'll show you that later. The final parameter in NoteFX menu is the effects mask sequencer. This is global for the whole sequence, not just this NoteFX. The default setting of 16 steps will track with a 16-step sequence when set to divide by 1. So the same masks will hit the same steps, but if the size or rate is changed, then things can get more interesting. Oh, there's really no obvious FX to mask, so Let's do a chop of 2. It will sound more intelligible with shorter notes. Bear with me. Okay, now you can hear the masking, being the darkened steps. No white, no effects. An odd length mask sequence adds to the complexity. It seems either you love synchronicity or non-synchronicity. Before I was into modular, I wanted everything repeating with little variation, but modular spoiled me. Now the more bizarre and pseudo-random, the better. Okay, let's have a look at note probability and chords, as I promised. I'll arm this guitar sequence for that. It's really only 2 chords, but echoes and variation makes it sound much more complex, which is the happy way the Sequarallel works. All are using FX1, so let's check it out. The note probability is 75%, so decreasing that setting almost lowers the density of the sequence. Masking some steps gives it even more personality. This is why I like odd numbered mask sequences. 3 and 5 will align to a chord, but 4 won't. The NoteFX Randomize, presently offsetting the Microarp, has a few options to modify the NoteFX parameters we have already explored, but also some that aren't settable in NoteFX, like solo ducking. This function will solo this note over all other tracks trackers playing. Have a listen. You can hear the VCO is missing some notes in its sequence now. The higher the value, the more chances it will solo. Let's go to the VCO sequence to look at some other random modifiers. These are all FX1. Yep. glide randomization offsets the glide start note, but it must be turned on. The higher the random range, the further the offset will be. With glide, it's good to put the start note in the center, where you think most of the notes will be. That way it glides up or down, adding a more random feel to it. The next randomizer is one of the Midi Cc's in NoteFX. I will of course use cut and res again. The VCO and a Midi square synth are playing together, so it will be heard. This is good if you don't want to worry about sourcing a variable cut filter to Midi. And remember, there can be up to 5 tracks trackers running at once on different Midi channels, or even MPE zones. That will be in another video. Believe it or not, this CC74 could also be presented as a source for one of the panel CC jacks. Thus, a cut res filter patch from the VCO could be made to roughly mimic the MIDI filter. CV mode smooth CC filter can be used to smooth out the jumpy random values. Randomizing velocity can put more of a human feel into the sequence, but I will do the Microarp first, as the VCO must be unplugged for that. The Microarp start step can be offset by Randomize with or without echo or chop. I'll turn off chop. Wherever the Microarp start step is set, the randomizer will add to it. If it adds to greater than 8 steps, it will roll back to 1. Let's put some offsets in. Isn't that cool? So unplug the VCO to hear the velocities getting randomized. Randomizing delay also adds some humanizing to the note. But this human sounds drunk. Adjustment means everything. The note lengths being randomized is less noticeable but makes a difference. Longer notes are getting chopped off by new ones starting on the VCO. The range adjusts the amount of variance from the set length. I'll skip over chop and echo for now. Randomizing fine-tune is also a useful humanizing variation, which I'm sure you already know, but it had to be included. It lightly offsets wherever the fine-tune setting is. Now back to chop and echo randomization. Echo's feed is varied by the range setting. The more echoes there are, the bigger the difference. Of course, the VCO has no level control, but won't be triggered if the velocity is less than 2. Without the VCO, it's a bit easier to hear. Well, you get the idea. Chop randomization is completely different. The offset is applied to the chop count, so it will drastically change. The range setting sort of limits the amount of chops, but chop must be set to at least 2 before it engages. Next is the Midi Pan offset. The Midi Pan needs to be somewhat already engaged before it is randomized, otherwise it's ignored. We already had a look at solo ducking. Its effect is very minimal from here. Random bridging was another must-have. You can see it on the green LED as well as hear it bridging. I'll turn down the MIDI a bit. When used with Bridge Sequencer in setup, this adds another dimension. Skip notes is just what it sounds like. It's very similar to probability setting, but can add to it. The range is like probability, with the lower setting being least likely. Randomize Repeat is very different in that it can actually pause the sequence and repeat steps. Let's check it out. This will knock out the synchronization though, as it doesn't realign automatically. TRAX reset input or max bars could realign it if you wanted to go that far. There you have it, TRAX NoteFX in a nutshell. The last and final tutorial will be on TRAX Quickbox and CV modes related to TRAX. I hope this video was informative and enjoyable. Now I'm going to do some jamming. I'm Sandy Sims. Keep on patching.